One of the great things about Adobe PDF SmartForms is that you can include validation and mandatory fields in your forms. This not only gives your users a good sense of how to complete the forms, but also ensures that when the data arrives in your organization, it's as complete and accurate as it possibly can be. Let's have a look at how we can add some of these validation and mandatory rules to a very simple form I've already built. Let's start by making a few of the fields on this form mandatory. I'll start with given name, double click on it, go to the Rules tab, and say it's always mandatory. Easy. You'll notice that you get a little asterisk next to the given name that visually indicates to the user that this field is mandatory, although that asterisk may be styled differently in the real form based on the style sheet definitions. I'm going to do the same for family name. And while we're here, you'll also notice that you can make a field mandatory based on a condition or another rule. There's occasional uses for that, but typically a field is either mandatory or not. Let's get a little more complicated. In age, we're going to say, well, you do have to tell us your age. So we are going to make this a mandatory field, but in addition we're going to create a validation rule. Let's look at the different types of validation rules that we can use. No validation is obvious. Regular expression is a engineering term that allows you to define the structure of a particular piece of text. If you know what a regular expression is, you'll know how powerful they are. If you don't know what a regular expression is, then the easiest way to find regular expressions is to search for them on the internet. And you can find regular expressions for all sorts of things, such as email addresses, websites, and various other things. We'll come back to that in a little while. Fixed length is used for things like account numbers. It says that this field must be exactly the length that we specify. We're not going to use one of those for age. We'll come back to XFA field pattern as well. This is a pattern that is defined by Adobe, and we can use them within PDF forms. And the one I'm going to use now for the age is a validation script. I'm going to use a very simple script that simply says age must be greater than or equal to 18. Simple. Now we are really in JavaScript at this point, and so we can make the scripting function as complex or as simple as we'd like. I'm going to keep it very simple for now. Then I'm going to go and have a quick look at the at two predefined fields that come with Avoka SmartForm Composer, and have a look at the validations that are automatically defined within them. So double click on Phone, Rules, and you'll see this uses an XFA field pattern, and here is an example of an XFA field pattern. Hopefully you get the idea. The pattern must be a 3-digit area code followed by a 3-4-digit telephone number. Let's also have a look at the email address. This also uses a validation rule, but in this case it uses a regular expression that I stole off the internet. Now, I'm not going to try and explain that to you, but believe me, it does insist that an email address at least looks like it has an email, like it has the right characters for an email. Now let's go and try and run this form. Here's my form. As you can see, all of my mandatory fields are nicely styled with red asterisks. And if I try to hit the submit button, which I added onto this form, you'll notice that Adobe Reader says that at least one required field was empty. Let's fill those in, or at least some of them. Let's try that again. And you see I get the same message even though there's only one field missing. One of the disadvantages of this approach is that Reader by default highlights all mandatory fields rather than just the ones that are missing. We'll look at how we can correct this later. I'll turn that off. Let's try and putting in an age of 16. Age validate failed. So this is the default message we get, and we can tune this, but we're immediately seeing that the age is incorrect. Let's try an age that we know is okay and tab out of that field. Perfect. Let's try a telephone number like 555-1212. Again, custom validation message, and the validation failed. Let's fix that problem. Error code. Beautiful. And finally, let's try and type in an invalid email address. This will have no ampersand and no dot anything on the end. Tab out of it, and again, invalid email address. Let's type something valid and tab out. Everything looks good. Let's try and hit the submit button and see what happens. Everything worked. Beautiful. Now, the basic validation rules all worked very well and very easily, which is great. But we did see a couple of problems. The first one was that all of the fields were highlighted in that ugly red. And the second one is that Reader by default tends to deal with validation errors one by one as you tab out of the fields. And there's no way to go and get a consolidated list of all of the errors that exist in my form. So Avoka SmartForm Composer defines a special block that makes this really, really simple and elegant for users to deal with their validation errors. We've done extensive usability testing on this block, and I think you'll like it. So I'm going to go to blocks. I'm going to drop in the error handler block just into the bottom of my form. I can change this heading if I want to, but I won't, and click Save. Let's simply save that and preview and see what we get. Not a lot of difference so far, but let's immediately skip over all of the fields and just click the Submit button and see what happens. As soon as there are any errors in your form or validation or mandatory fields that are missing, the error block, the Avoka error block, will immediately appear and will provide a list of all of the errors that you have. If I add to the validation errors, to the mandatory field errors, some other errors, I will get those as I tab out of the fields, but I'll also get them if I try to submit. So you'll see here error messages as well as validation messages appearing in the error box. From the error box, which always appears at the bottom of the form, and there may be a very long form with just a few errors sprinkled through the form, I can either just go to the first issue, and you'll also notice that that all of the issues are actually highlighted in a color that is stylable through the style sheets. In this case, we're using this rather ugly pink, but you can completely control that through the style sheets. You can also fix some of the errors. So, for example, Howard Traceman, and refresh the error list. And finally, if you double click on any one of the errors, that will take the cursor directly to the field that is an error. So I'll double click, and you can see that the phone field is highlighted. This makes it much easier for users to locate and correct their errors, and also to know exactly where their errors are. You can also override the default messages that you get when validation or mandatory rules are broken by double-clicking on the widget, clicking on the Rules tab, and changing the validation message, such as $label, which will always be age in this case. In this case, must be greater than or equal to 18. I could do something similar for the mandatory message if I wanted.